Beneath the restless waves of the Pacific, there is a city that should not exist. Black basalt towers rise from a fragile reef, canals cut through stone like veins, and silence lingers where once an empire ruled with fear. For centuries, no one dared to live there again. The people called it cursed, haunted, forbidden. But Nan Madol still stands, waiting, a city larger than Venice, built where no city should survive, a riddle of stone that defies both history and time. This is not only the story of rulers and ruins. It is the story of shadows that whisper, of voices that never died, of a place both dead and immortal. Some say it was built by men. Others believe it was conjured by gods. And there are those who whisper it was never human at all. Tonight, you will walk through its ruins. You will hear its silence. You will feel its weight. And when the story ends, you may never look at the ocean the same way again. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, where endless blue stretches like an ancient mirror reflecting the sky, there lies an island called Pohnpei. To most, it seems like nothing more than a green jewel surrounded by the restless waters of Micronesia. But hidden at the edge of this island is something that does not belong to the natural world. Something so vast, so impossible, that it defies every explanation humans have tried to give it. Nan Madol, a city built not on land, but on the ocean itself. Towering basalt columns stacked in a way that no human hand should have been able to achieve. Canals of water slicing through the ruins, making the city look less like a place to live and more like a labyrinth meant to entrap the soul. The stones rest heavy and black, their sharp edges still holding the memory of fire from which they were born. They are not scattered as fallen boulders, but precisely placed, beams weighing tens of tons each, arranged in walls, platforms, and foundations that rise out of the coral reef as though they grew there. Imagine standing before them for the first time. The sea is whispering against the stones, the air thick with salt, and the cries of distant seabirds echo between the ruins. Everything feels too quiet, too unnatural. The place is dead, yet is alive with secrets. The stones do not crumble as ordinary ruins do. They seem to wait, watching, holding the silence of centuries like a secret that refuses to be spoken. Who built this city? Why here, in the middle of the ocean, upon fragile coral reefs where nothing stable should last? Why use stones so massive that even with all the machines of today, it would be a challenge to move them? These questions are not new. They haunted the first islanders who whispered of the city's curse. They troubled the sailors who stumbled upon it in the age of exploration. And they continue to torment scholars today. The first stories say Nan Madol was not built by men at all. The islanders of Pohnpei whisper that two brothers came across the sea, bringing with them powers beyond the reach of mortals. They carried the stones by magic, or by some force that men have long forgotten. The city was their conjuring, not their construction. That is why it sits where no city should stand, perched on living coral, resting in the embrace of the ocean as though summoned into being. And if you listen closely, the islanders say you can still feel it. At night, when the winds are low and the tide crawls through the canals, the stones hum. A vibration too faint to be called a sound, yet strong enough to settle into your bones. As if the city remembers the forces that lifted it from the depths and is waiting for the moment to awaken them again. The labyrinth of Nan Madol is not small. It stretches across nearly 200 acres, with over 90 separate islets built from basalt logs, each forming a part of a grander whole. But walking through it, one does not feel the bustle of a great city. There are no signs of markets, no fields, no ordinary homes. Instead, there is a feeling of ritual, as though Nan Madol was never meant to be lived in, but rather performed in. A stage for rulers, priests, and sacrifices, rather than a city for ordinary life. And that perhaps is the most haunting question. Was Nan Madol ever meant for humans at all? The ruins stand in silence, but silence can be deceiving. The canals still ripple with water, winding like veins through the stone. They look as though they were meant to carry more than boats. Perhaps they carried offerings. Perhaps they carried bodies. Perhaps they carried whispers of the dead, floating through the city's black arteries until they were swallowed by the sea. Legends say Nan Madol was ruled by the Sodalur dynasty, a line of kings so powerful and absolute that every breath on the island belonged to them. But before their story, before their cruelty, before their fall, there was only this, the impossible creation of the stone labyrinth itself. No one knows how it was made, or by what hands, or for what true purpose. Some explorers claimed it was the work of giants. Others believed it was the remnant of a lost continent, a fragment of a world swallowed by the Pacific. A few whispered it was not human at all, that beings from beyond the stars had shaped it as a station, a doorway, or a warning. The truth is buried in the basalt, unbroken by time, unyielding to explanation. Stand within Nan Madol long enough, and you begin to feel it. The atmosphere presses down on you, heavy as the stones themselves. The city seems to reject you, to remind you that you are an intruder. It is a sadness without words, the grief of a city abandoned by its people, left to the sea, forgotten by the world. The longer you stay, the more it feels as though the walls lean in and the canals darken, and the silence deepens into something unbearable. And yet, people return. They cannot stay away. Explorers, archaeologists, wanderers, all drawn to the labyrinth like moths to a flame. Some come seeking knowledge. Some seek treasure. Some seek proof of myths whispered across centuries. But all of them leave with the same haunting impression. Nan Madol is not just ruins. It is a riddle carved in stone, a riddle that resists every answer. The basalt beams themselves hold the greatest mystery. They're not small stones one could carry in handfuls. They are massive, weighing 25 to 50 tons each. Some are longer than a man is tall, thicker than his body. They were quarried somewhere far from Pohnpei, yet there is no evidence of how they were transported. No boats large enough, no tools advanced enough, no roads laid for their passage. The ocean between the quarries and Nan Madol should have made their journey impossible. And yet here they are, stacked with precision, locked together like black teeth rising from the reef. Modern engineers have studied them, puzzled over them, even tried to replicate the feat still. The question stands, how could people with no machinery, no metal, no beasts of burden move such stones across miles of ocean? The islanders' answer is simple. They did not. The stones move themselves. In the whispers of Pohnpei, Nan Madol is called a place of spirits. The city was born of powers not meant for men. Some say it was carried stone by flying dragons, summoned by chance of the builders. Others say the basalt beams rose out of the ocean on their own, drawn by forces that could command even the earth itself. These stories may sound like myth, but when you walk among the ruins, when you stand against the sheer weight of the impossible walls, you begin to wonder whether myth is only another form of memory. But there is something deeper in the sadness of Nan Madol. Something more than mystery, more than wonder. It is the weight of loss. For this was not always a dead city. Once, its canals shone with firelight reflected from torches. Once its walls heard laughter, prayers, commands, and screams. Once, the sea carried offerings to its rulers, and the people obeyed under fear of the dynasty's rule. The city was alive once, burning with power and pain. And now, all of that has turned to silence. The ruins hold not just stone, but the shadows of lives lived and lost. Every step echoes with absence. Every wall is a reminder of something torn away. It is not only the stones that make Nan Madol heavy. It is the grief of centuries, the sorrow of abandonment. A sorrow too vast for words, locked in basalt that refuses to crumble. And perhaps that is why the legends endure. Because the city feels unfinished. It feels as though it is waiting for its story to be told again. Waiting for someone to remember what it was meant to be. Waiting for the truth to rise from beneath the waves. But if you linger long enough, if you walk through the canals at dusk, you might hear it. Not the sound of water or wind. Not the cries of birds. But something softer, older, a murmur that seems to come from the stones themselves. The islanders call it the city's memory, the voice of Nan Madol, They say it is a warning that the city was never meant to be touched by human hands. And as the night deepens, as the shadows of basalt rise around you, you feel it, the unease that you are not walking through ruins, but through a place still alive, still watching, still waiting. Nan Madol does not tell its secrets. It only whispers, and the whispers say the same thing again and again. This city was never built by men. Long before the world knew the name Nan Madol, long before sailors charted the Pacific or scholars puzzled over its basalt walls, the people of Pohnpei already carried the story of its beginning. It is not told in stone inscriptions or scrolls, but in whispered legends passed from one generation to the next by firelight and moonlight, when the sea's voice is the only sound in the night. The story begins not with a kingdom, not with rulers, not even with men, but with shadows. The islanders say that two brothers came from beyond the horizon, strangers who appeared without warning, carried by the sea, yet belonging to no land that could be named. Their names were Olisipa and Olisopa. No one knew from where they had come, but they were not like other men. Their eyes were deep and distant, their presence unsettling, and they carried with them secrets older than the island itself. Wherever they walked, silence followed. Wherever they looked, people turned away, for it was said the brothers could read the thoughts of men as easily as one reads the ripples on the tide. These brothers did not come seeking land to farm or food to eat. They came with a purpose, a vision of a city that would stand upon the ocean, a place of stone and power where no ordinary person could dwell. They carried no tools, no ships, no beasts of burden, and yet they said they would build. The people of the island laughed at first. How could anyone build on the sea? The waters would swallow it. The coral would not hold. The stones required did not exist on this shore. But the brothers did not laugh. They only whispered among themselves. And when they began, the laughter of the islanders died in their throats. For the brothers did not quarry stones with chisels or haul them with ropes. They sang, and as they sang, the earth trembled. As they chanted words that no one else could understand, black stones rose from distant places and flew through the air as though carried by invisible wings. They came from over the mountains, from deep within the forests, from across the waves. Massive beams of basalt, each heavier than 100 men could lift, drifted through the sky and settled gently into place. One upon another, they were stacked with a precision no hand could achieve. Night after night, the brothers sang, and stone after stone obeyed. The islanders watched in silence, their fear growing as the city began to rise from the ocean itself. It did not feel like construction. It felt like conjuring. The sea seemed to part for the brothers. The coral obeyed their will, and the stones themselves seemed eager to belong to this strange design. What they built was not a village, not a home, not even a fortress. It was something else. A labyrinth of basalt walls and canals, platforms and chambers that stretched across the reef like a shadow given solid form. No one dared to ask what it was for, and no one dared to enter. For though the city belonged to the brothers, it felt alive, as if the stones themselves carried their breath. The islanders whispered that Olisipa and Olisopa were not men at all. Some said they were magicians, born from the gods. Others believed they were spirits who had taken the shape of men. A few dared to whisper darker things, that they were not of this earth, but had come from beyond the stars, bearing powers no mortal should command. Whatever they were, their city was not human. It belonged to the shadows, and it cast a shadow across the island that would never be lifted. In time, the brothers' creation grew vast. 90 islets linked by canals, basalt towers rising against the horizon, chambers that echoed with silence so deep it seemed to come from the grave. The people feared to enter, for they said the air within the city was different, heavy, as if it remembered the chanting of the brothers, even after their voices had ceased. Some claimed that at night, the walls themselves trembled, as though the stones were alive, remembering the power that had placed them there. The brothers vanished as mysteriously as they had come. Some said they returned to the sea, swallowed by the waves that had carried them to the island. Others said they were taken by the gods, their work complete. Still others believed they had never left at all, that their spirits remained bound to the stones, their whispers echoing through the city when the world grows silent. Whatever the truth, Nan Madol was left behind, a monument that should not exist, a labyrinth of stone born not of labor, but of shadow. But a city, once made, cannot remain empty forever. The people feared Nan Madol, but fear has its own allure. In time, rulers came, drawn to its walls, claiming it as a seat of power. They saw in its impossible stones a proof of their divine right to rule, a throne gifted not by men but by gods. And so, Nan Madol became the heart of a dynasty, the Sautelar, who would one day control every breath of Pohnpei. But that was still to come. In these early days, Nan Madol stood as a riddle, silent and waiting. The islanders did not forget how it was made. They told the story again and again, by firelight and under starlight, always with the same warning. This city was not born as other cities are. It was summoned, conjured, pulled from the very bones of the earth by powers beyond comprehension. And things born from shadows do not easily let go of the shadows that made them. Even today, the people of Pohnpei say that Nan Madol is not silent at all. At night, when the moon is high and the sea is still, the stones hum. A low vibration that is not quite a sound, more a feeling crawling through your bones, reminding you that the stones are not dead. They are awake. They are listening. They are remembering. Divers who have entered the canals at night speak of strange sensations. They say the water grows colder, as if touched by unseen hands. They say shadows move where no light exists. They say the basalt walls seem to pulse, as though with a heartbeat too slow for men to hear. Some leave trembling, some never return. And always, the islanders shake their heads, saying the same thing their ancestors said. This city was not meant for human hands. But perhaps the most haunting part of the legend is this. The brothers who built Nan Madol did not finish their work. Some say the city is incomplete, that what we see today is only a fragment of what was intended. If so, then what was the full vision? What kind of place did they seek to create upon the sea? And why did they vanish before it was done? There are no answers, only whispers. Some believe the brothers were punished for their hubris, taken away before they could complete their conjuring. Others believe they saw what the city was becoming and fled from the darkness they had unleashed. And some believe they succeeded, that Nan Madol was always meant to be unfinished, a doorway waiting for something yet to come. Stand within Nan Madol and you will feel it. The air presses down on you, thick with memory. The walls seem to lean closer the longer you remain, as if listening to your thoughts. The canals ripple with unseen movements, as though carrying things too old and too hidden to name. The city is not abandoned. It is waiting, waiting for the ones who built it, waiting for the shadows to return. And so the story of Nan Madol's birth is not a tale of stone and labor, but of magic, mystery, and sorrow. It is the story of a city born not from hands, but from voices, from forces unseen. A city that even now hums with the memory of its conjuring. A city that was never meant for men, yet has bound itself to human history, drawing rulers, conquerors, and wanderers into its depths. What lingers in Nan Madol today? The hum of the stones suggests an answer too unsettling to name. If magic built this city, if powers beyond human understanding gave it life, then those powers may not have died with the brothers. They may remain, coiled within the basalt, waiting in silence. And if that is true, then Nan Madol is not ruins at all. It is a living city, a city that breathes in shadows, a city that remembers. The question is not whether Nan Madol still carries the power of its creation. The question is whether that power sleeps or whether it still waits for someone to call it forth again. Nan Madol did not remain an empty monument for long. Stones that hummed in silence could not lie and use forever, and men, when faced with wonders they do not understand, often claim them as their own. From the shadows of myth, from the trembling memory of the brothers who conjured it, Nan Madol became something more than a miracle. It became a throne. The rulers who claimed it were called the Sauteleur. They rose like the basalt towers themselves, firm and unyielding, and they declared that the city was theirs by right of power. To the people of Pohnpei, their words carried weight. For who else but the chosen of gods could claim to rule from such a place? The labyrinth of stone became their palace, and from within its canals and chambers they stretched their power across the island. At first, their rule brought unity. For the first time, Pohnpei was drawn together under one hand. The Sauteleur demanded order, and the people obeyed. They delivered food, they paid tribute, they bent the knee. There was strength in this new order, a sense of destiny. Nan Madol, with its impossible stones, seemed to give the dynasty a divine shield. As long as the rulers sat within the basalt walls, their authority could not be questioned. But unity has a shadow. Where obedience is demanded, fear begins to grow. Where fear grows, cruelty is never far behind. The Sauteleur dynasty changed. What began as order became domination. They did not simply ask for tribute, they demanded it. Pohnpei's people were forced to deliver food, fish, fruits, and pigs in endless supply. Families who had little kept nothing for themselves. Starvation loomed over villages, yet still the rulers demanded more. The dynasty's cruelty did not stop with hunger. They claimed the gods themselves spoke only through them. Temples were raised within Nan Madol's basalt walls, and worship was no longer a choice. The people were commanded to offer their prayers to the rulers' chosen deities, abandoning their ancestral spirits, their traditions, their own voices. To disobey was not merely treason against the rulers, but blasphemy against heaven itself. And those who resisted were silenced, sometimes with exile, often with death. Nan Madol's labyrinth of canals, once silent with mystery, now carried the echoes of suffering. Some chambers became prisons. Some canals ran dark with offerings too terrible to name. The city that was conjured from shadows began to feed upon the shadows of men's fear. There are stories told of how deep the dynasty's cruelty sank. Mothers were forced to surrender children as tribute. Villages were emptied to satisfy the rulers' feasts. The people whispered that the Sauteleur had become less than human, their hearts replaced with stone like the walls around them. Fear was no longer a response to their rule. It became the heartbeat of the entire island. Imagine standing in Nan Madol during those years. The basalt towers blot out the horizon. Canals divide the ground beneath your feet, and the weight of the dynasty's gaze falls upon you like a physical burden. You cannot speak freely. You cannot pray freely. You cannot even eat freely. Every action belongs to the rulers. Every breath feels borrowed. The very air seems heavy, carrying not only salt from the sea, but the despair of the people who walk within the city's reach. This is why the dynasty became known as the Forbidden Rulers, not only because they forbade dissent, but because they themselves seemed forbidden to the natural order of men. Their power was not ordinary. It was unnatural. It came from a city not built by human hands, and it carried with it a weight too immense for compassion to survive. Yet power, when stretched too far, begins to crack. The cruelty of the Sauteleur grew monstrous, but with it came weakness, for fear can sustain obedience only so long. Beneath the silence of obedience, resentment smoldered. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the villages. Old gods were invoked in secret, names of ancestors spoken in hushed defiance. But the people knew the rulers' walls were too strong, their reach too vast. Alone, no man could challenge them. Still, the dynasty continued. Generation after generation, ruler after ruler, each one more ruthless than the last. The city itself seemed to echo their corruption. Where once the basalt stones hummed with the memory of their magical birth, now they vibrated with something darker, heavier. Visitors claimed to feel it in their bones, the sense that the stones themselves had grown weary of the rulers who sat upon them. It is said the final Sauteleur ruler was the cruelest of them all. His demands became impossible. He demanded greater and greater tribute. stripping the islanders of all they had. He demanded worship not of gods, but of himself, declaring his own body divine. His pride blinded him to the growing storm that gathered in silence around him. The dynasty had stood for centuries. It was built not on love, not on trust, not on balance, but on fear. And fear, though powerful, is fragile. The rulers believed themselves untouchable, but the same shadows that had given them their throne would one day demand a reckoning. For legends say the fall of the Sauteleur was not a rebellion of men. It was something far darker. Some whisper that the ruler's cruelty awakened the old gods, the ones the people had been forced to abandon. Spirits long silenced rose again, furious at being denied their place. Storms began to gather, crops withered, fish vanished from the seas. The dynasty's demands grew harsher in response, but no cruelty could quiet the wrath that had been stirred. Others tell that a warrior came from across the ocean, a stranger who carried with him not only strength but the will of the spirits themselves. He did not come alone. He brought storms in his wake, omens that shook the island to its core. He was not merely a man. He was vengeance made flesh. Still others believe the fall was not divine retribution nor foreign conquest, but the city itself. Nan Madol, born of shadows, had grown weary of the rulers who used its power for cruelty. The stones that had once obeyed the voices of the brothers now whispered against the dynasty. The hum within the walls grew louder, until one night the city turned against its masters. The canals that once carried offerings carried only silence. The walls that once sheltered kings became their tombs. What is certain is this: the Sauteleur dynasty did not end by rebellion alone. The fall was too sudden, too absolute, too final. No simple uprising could erase centuries of power in so short a time. Something else was at work, something older, darker, and merciless. And when the dynasty fell, it left behind not peace, but scars. Nan Madol remained, its basalt towers still unbroken, its canals still flowing. But the air within grew heavier, thick with memory. The city did not forget. The stones did not forgive. The whispers of cruelty lingered in every wall, every chamber, every corner where silence hung too long. The people did not return to live within its walls. They feared it too deeply. To them, Nan Madol was cursed, poisoned by the blood of the dynasty and the shadows that had claimed it. They left it to the sea, abandoned it to the tides, allowing moss and salt to claim its edges. But no abandonment could silence it. Even empty, Nan Madol remained alive, its stones humming with the memory of a dynasty that had demanded absolute obedience and the darker forces that had ended it. Today, when you walk through Nan Madol, you walk through more than ruins. You walk through the echo of tyranny, the shadow of cruelty, the silence of a dynasty that built its throne upon fear. The air still feels heavy, as though the heartbeat of fear lingers within it, as though the city remembers more vividly than men ever could. The Sauteleur dynasty is gone, but Nan Madol does not forget. Its stones vibrate still, carrying the memory of obedience demanded, lives taken, gods defied. And somewhere in that hum, if you listen closely, you may hear the warning it carries. Power born of shadows always ends in shadows. But the end of the Sauteleur dynasty was not an end at all. It was a beginning. For into the silence they left behind stepped something far more terrifying than rebellion, more final than vengeance. The dynasty's fall was not the work of men alone. It was the work of something far darker. The reign of the Sauteleur stretched long across Pohnpei, binding the people in chains of fear and silence. From their basalt throne in Nan Madol, they ruled not with compassion, but with cruelty. Their word was law, their hunger insatiable, their pride without limit. For years, the people obeyed. They brought their tribute of food. They offered their prayers to gods not their own, and they swallowed their anger because there was no choice. But nothing in this world lasts forever, not even tyranny. The whispers of the islanders say that the cruelty of the Sauteleur reached so deep It did not simply break the people. It disturbed something far older than men. The first signs were subtle. The rains, once plentiful, grew uncertain. Crops that had always flourished began to fail. The breadfruit trees bore less fruit, taro fields withered, and fishermen returned with empty nets. Hunger crept across the island like a shadow that would not lift. At first, the rulers ignored it. If the people starved, they demanded more tribute still, believing their demands would bend nature itself to their will. But nature did not bend. Then came the waters. The sea, once generous, grew hostile. Calm bays turned treacherous, waves rising without warning to smash boats into the reefs. The channels around Nan Madol churned as though alive, pulling men beneath without a trace. Those who survived spoke of voices beneath the waves, whispering in tones too deep to be human. The islanders began to fear the sea itself, as though it had joined in judgment against the rulers who claimed dominion over all. But the strangest signs came from above. On nights when the skies were clear, lights flickered above Nan Madol. Not stars, not fire, but shifting glows that danced like spirits. Some were white, some red, some green, shimmering like torches held by invisible hands. The people watched in silence, afraid to speak of what they saw. For to speak was to risk punishment, and yet to stay silent was to let dread fester in the heart. The rulers noticed too. They saw the fields dying, the seas rising, the skies burning with omens. And with every sign, their paranoia deepened. They did not ask what they had done to anger the island or the gods. They did not repent. They did not soften. Instead, they tightened their grip. Nan Madol's canals, once the pathways of the city, became rivers of fear. The rulers ordered dungeons and prisons to be built along their edges. Chambers of stone where dissenters could be hidden away, their cries swallowed by basalt walls. Those who spoke of curses were silenced. Those who defied the gods and secret rituals were dragged into the city and never seen again. The rulers believed they could suffocate the curse with fear. But the curse did not suffocate. It grew. The people, once resigned to obedience, began to whisper again. They whispered of the old gods, the ones abandoned when the dynasty demanded their false worship. They whispered of ancestral spirits who had been ignored, of sacred traditions that had been broken. They said the curse was not random. It was punishment. Punishment for the arrogance of the Sauteleur, for their endless cruelty, for their demand that every man bow not only in body but in soul. And still, the rulers pressed harder. Tribute was doubled. Hunger spread until families began to waste away. Parents watched their children weaken, powerless to defy the dynasty's commands. The dynasty answered suffering with indifference, and indifference with brutality. The prisons grew crowded, the canals ran darker, and the city seemed to pulse with the weight of sorrow. The rulers had forgotten one truth. A kingdom of fear is a kingdom already broken. In those years, it seemed as though all of nature conspired against them. Storms rose without warning, tearing roofs from homes and flattening crops. The earth trembled, shaking the basalt walls of Nan Madol, as though even the stones were weary of the ruler's cruelty. The skies burned with strange colors, streaks of fire that frightened even the guards of the dynasty. The omens could no longer be ignored, yet the rulers clung to their throne as if defiance alone would save them. Some say that in the heart of Nan Madol, the rulers gathered in secret. They offered sacrifices greater than any before, seeking to quiet the gods they had offended. Animals, offerings of food, and, it is whispered, even human lives were given to the sea, cast into the black canals as desperate bribes. But the waters did not forgive. The skies did not still. The lights above the city only grew brighter, flickering like eyes watching from beyond. The dynasty grew fearful not only of the people, but of each other. Brothers betrayed brothers. Advisors whispered against kings. Guards turned suspicious of guards. The prisons filled not only with dissenters, but with those accused of treachery within the dynasty itself. Nan Madol, once the symbol of their eternal power, became their cage, and the shadows of its basalt walls pressed closer every day. It is said that the final ruler of the Sauteleur grew obsessed with omens. He feared to sleep, for dreams brought visions of waves swallowing his throne. He feared the night, for the skies burned with unnatural fire. He feared his own people, seeing in every face the possibility of rebellion. So he retreated deeper into the labyrinth of Nan Madol, surrounding himself with guards and priests, burying himself in rituals that brought no peace. But fear cannot be buried. It seeps through stone, it clings to air, it becomes the very blood that flows through a kingdom. And then the whispers began. Whispers of a stranger across the sea. A warrior who was not of Pohnpei, but who carried with him the wrath of gods. A man destined to challenge the dynasty, to break the chains of fear, to bring the curse to its final fulfillment. The rulers laughed when they first heard it. No outsider could challenge the Sauteleur, not while they held Nan Madol. But the laughter was thin, and it carried no strength. For deep within, they remembered what they had ignored. Their power was not their own. It had been borrowed, claimed from a city born of shadows. And shadows are loyal to no man. The curse of the Sauteleur had already begun. Crops had withered, seas had turned hostile, skies had burned with fire. The prisons had filled, the people had suffered, the rulers had grown paranoid. Every omen pointed to an ending, one that no prison or guard could prevent. And so, when the warrior arrived, it was not as an invader, but as an answer to prayers whispered in silence, to gods long abandoned, to curses long ignored. His name would echo in legend. His arrival would change the fate of Nan Madol forever. But the Sauteleur did not yet understand. They did not see him as the shadow of their downfall. The storm made flesh, the living curse come to claim its due. They saw only a man, and that blindness would be their final mistake. For the curse was no longer bound to the skies or the seas. The curse had taken human form. It had come across the waves. It had come to Nan Madol. The curse of the Sauteleur had already begun. The crops had withered, the seas had turned against fishermen, and the skies burned with omens no one could deny. Fear filled every village, silence pressed upon every home, and even within the basalt towers of Nan Madol, the rulers trembled though they dared not show it. For centuries they had seemed untouchable, their throne unshakable, their cruelty unchallenged. But the shadows had begun to stir, and shadows often choose strange messengers. And so it was that one day, sails were seen on the horizon. They came not as traders, not as wanderers, but as warriors. The sea carried them with a steady wind, their canoes slicing across the waves with the determination of destiny itself. At their head stood a man whose name would echo through history, half in legend and half in fear. His name was Isoclecal. No one could agree on who he truly was. To some, he was a man, a warrior born on a distant island who had heard the cries of Pohnpei's people and come to answer them. To others, he was no mortal at all, but a demigod sent by the heavens to end the Sauteleur's reign. And there were some who whispered something darker still, that he was not sent by the gods, but by the curse itself, summoned across the waves by the hunger of Nan Madol to finish what it had begun. Whatever the truth, his arrival shook the island to its core. The Sauteleur had long ruled by fear, but when word spread that an outsider had come with warriors at his side, the people felt something they had not felt in generations. They felt hope. Quiet, fragile, dangerous hope. Whispers spread faster than guards could silence them. Stories grew with each telling of Isoclecal's strength, of his divine purpose, of the storm that followed his sails. Even before he set foot upon Pohnpei, his presence cracked the walls of fear that had bound the people for centuries. Isoclecal did not come alone. He brought with him men hardened by war, warriors who carried not just weapons, but conviction. Their canoes were filled with spears, clubs, and shields, but also with chants and songs that seemed to carry the rhythm of the sea itself. When they landed, the ground seemed to tremble, as though the earth itself recognized the weight of what had arrived. The rulers of the Sauteleur laughed, when they heard of him. They had ruled too long to believe any man could threaten them. They dismissed him as a fool, an outsider blinded by ambition, a child daring to challenge gods. But behind their laughter, fear gnawed at them, for the omens had grown too many, the curse too heavy. And now, the curse had a face. The first meeting between Isoclecal and the people was not a battle. It was a gathering. Villages sent representatives to see him, to test his strength, to feel his presence. What they found was not only a man of flesh and blood, but a presence that stirred their souls. He did not speak like an invader demanding submission. He spoke like a voice that had been promised in silence. He told them of justice, of freedom, of a time when their ancestors had lived without chains. And he promised that the Sauteleur, who had stolen so much, would not stand forever. The people listened, and for the first time they believed. But hope is dangerous. It stirs rebellion, and rebellion stirs blood. Isoclecal's arrival marked the first cracks in Nan Madol's power. But cracks alone do not topple stone. For that, there must be fire, and fire was coming. The Sauteleur grew restless. They saw villages whispering in corners, food supplies dwindling, guards growing uneasy. They began to tighten their grip, doubling their demands, punishing even the smallest signs of disobedience. But the tighter they held, the more their power slipped through their fingers. Fear no longer silenced the people. The people had begun to look to the sea, to the stranger who had come with warriors at his side. Isoclecal did not wait long. He knew that hope, if left too long, could die as quickly as it was born. He began to move his warriors through the island, gathering support, weaving alliances, preparing for the moment when whispers would turn into war cries. Every step he took toward Nan Madol felt inevitable, as though destiny itself was guiding his path. The dynasty, once so confident, now trembled behind its basalt walls. They sent envoys, they offered bribes, they even attempted to sow doubt among the people by spreading rumors of Isoclecal's mortality. But the more they tried, the more the people turned away. For the truth was plain. The Sauteleur had lost the loyalty of their island. Their rule was built on fear, and fear had finally broken. Still, Nan Madol stood. Its basalt towers were vast, its canals deep, its walls unyielding. It was not a city easily taken, and the dynasty's guards were still many. Blood would be spilled before the curse could finish its work. The first skirmishes came quickly. Warriors clashed in forests and along coasts, their cries echoing through the island. Isoclecal fought at the front, and every victory spread his legend further. The people began to believe he could not be killed, that the gods themselves shielded him. And with each victory, more joined his side. The Sauteleur rulers, once lords of the island, found themselves isolated. Nan Madol became less a palace and more a fortress under siege. Its canals no longer carried tribute, but fear. Its walls no longer symbolized divinity, but desperation. The dynasty's arrogance had blinded them, but now their blindness was stripped away. They saw the storm coming, and they knew it carried their name. But Isoclecal was not simply a warrior. He was a shadow of destiny, and destiny does not move in straight lines. For the legends say that betrayal walked beside him, as it often does in stories of power. Some claim members of the dynasty themselves whispered to him, secretly offering guidance through the labyrinth of Nan Madol. Others say priests, once loyal to the rulers, began to doubt and turned in silence to the stranger from the sea. Betrayal became another weapon, hidden but sharper than any blade. And so the stage was set. Nan Madol, the city born of shadows, stood waiting. The Sauteleur, the forbidden rulers, prepared to defend their throne. And Isoclecal, the stranger from the sea, gathered his warriors at the edge of destiny. The battle was coming. It would be written not only in blood spilled upon basalt and in screams that echoed across canals, but also in whispers of betrayal, of omens, of the curse that had brought it all to this moment. The storm of destiny finally reached Nan Madol. For centuries, the Sauteleur dynasty had ruled from its basalt throne, their voices louder than the cries of the people. their commands heavier than the stones themselves. They had demanded obedience, and for centuries obedience had been given. But fear is a fragile kingdom, and when it breaks, it does not simply bend, it shatters. The arrival of Isoclecal and his warriors was the spark. The island, already trembling under famine, omens, and the weight of curses, erupted into fire. Villages once bound in silence now spoke in rebellion. Families who had hidden their suffering for generations found their voices again. For the first time in centuries, the Sauteleur were not gods. They were men, and men could fall. The war shook Nan Madol's foundations. From the forest to the coasts, battles raged. Warriors clashed beneath the burning sun, their cries echoing through valleys that had once known only silence. Spears pierced flesh, clubs shattered bone, and blood soaked into the soil that had refused to yield crops. The land itself seemed to drink in the violence, as though hunger demanded not only food but sacrifice. And then the battles reached Nan Madol. The basalt towers that had stood as unshakable symbols of the dynasty's power now trembled beneath the weight of war. The canals that had once carried tribute and offerings now ran red with blood. Firelight reflected off the black stone walls, turning them into mirrors of chaos. The labyrinth of the city became a battlefield, every corner an ambush, every canal a grave. The Sauteleur rulers fought with desperation. Their guards defended the city with ferocity, but ferocity could not match inevitability. For the curse that had haunted the dynasty had already chosen its path, and it was written not in their survival, but in their fall. The people, once afraid to enter Nan Madol, now stormed its gates. They came not only as warriors, but as witnesses to the breaking of chains. Mothers who had lost children, fathers who had lost crops, families who had suffered under the dynasty's cruelty, all carried within them a rage that no guard could withstand. The city of stone, built by shadows, echoed with the voices of the living demanding justice. Yet even as blood spilled across basalt, something strange occurred. The final Sauteleur rulers did not die as men die. The legends say that when the last of the dynasty was cornered, when their walls crumbled and their guards lay slain, the rulers did not fall beneath the blades of their enemies. Instead, something darker happened. The people who were there tell that the rulers seemed to wither before their eyes. Their voices faltered, their bodies trembled, and their eyes grew hollow. They did not scream in pain. They screamed in silence, as though something unseen had come to claim them. The air grew heavy, the canals stilled, and a chill passed through the basalt walls, as if the city itself had drawn breath. And then the rulers were gone, not slain, consumed by the very spirits they had tried to command. The people whispered that the dynasty had been swallowed by the curse they themselves had awakened, dragged into the shadows of Nan Madol to suffer for eternity. Some said their spirits were bound within the stones, trapped to echo their cruelty forever. Others said the sea had claimed them, pulling them beneath the canals into depths darker than death itself. But all agreed on one truth. The Sauteleur dynasty did not simply end. It was erased, and yet, even in victory, there was no triumph. Nan Madol did not celebrate. Its walls, though still standing, seemed heavier. Its canals, though still flowing, seemed darker. The hum of the stones grew stronger, vibrating in the bones of those who dared remain. The people had won freedom, but the city itself had not been freed. Isoclecal took his place as ruler, but his throne was not the throne of conquerors. It was the throne of shadows. He sat within Nan Madol, yet the air pressed upon him as it had pressed upon the dynasty before him. For the city was never truly theirs. It had been built by powers beyond men, and it seemed to reject every mortal who claimed it. The people who once rejoiced at the fall of the Sauteleur soon grew uneasy. The canals whispered at night. Strange lights still flickered above the city. Those who lingered too long within the basalt walls felt watched, their thoughts no longer their own. Prisoners vanished without trace. Warriors awoke, screaming from dreams of being pulled beneath the water by unseen hands. The dynasty had fallen, but the curse had not lifted. Nan Madol, instead of becoming a city of freedom, became a tomb. And in that truth lies the greatest sorrow of all. The people had bled for their freedom. They had endured generations of cruelty. They had prayed for release, and they had risen in rebellion at last. They had broken their rulers. Yet what they found in the end was not a city reborn, but a city dying. The basalt stones still stood, but they stood like gravestones, monuments to cruelty, silence, and loss. The canals still flowed, but their waters seemed stained, carrying whispers of blood spilled and lives taken. The air still trembled, but its hum carried no promise, only warning. Isoclecal ruled, but he ruled over a place that refused to live. Nan Madol had consumed the sought allure, and in time, it would consume all who dared claim it. And so the city began to wither. Not in its stones, they remained unbroken. Not in its canals, they remained filled, but in its soul. The people abandoned it, fearful of what lingered within. Villages grew once more beyond its reach, but Nan Madol itself stood empty, a husk of power, a labyrinth where shadows gathered and whispers deepened. The fall of the Stone Kings was not the end of Nan Madol's story. It was the beginning of its death. For cities are not only stone and water. They are life, breath, laughter, and memory. Without people, without trust, without love, they become hollow, and hollow places invite darkness. Nan Madol became hollow, and the darkness that filled it was not the darkness of night or shadow, but the darkness of memory, the sorrow of generations bound in chains, the pain of families broken, the fear of rulers consumed by spirits they could not control. The people left, but the city remained, holding all of it within its basalt walls. A monument not of glory, but of grief. Even now, when the wind blows across its stones, some say they hear the voices of the sought allure, screaming in silence from where they were swallowed. Some say they see the canals ripple though no wind stirs, as if unseen hands still move within. Some say the lights above Nan Madol are not spirits watching, but warnings, reminders of the curse that no victory could erase. The rulers had fallen. The people were free. Yet Nan Madol did not thrive. It began to die. When the sought allure dynasty fell, the people rejoiced, but Nan Madol did not. Its basalt walls still stood, unbroken and defiant against time. Yet the city itself had become hollow. The laughter of rulers was gone. The cries of captives silenced. The weight of tyranny shattered. What remained was stone, water, and silence. For centuries, Nan Madol stood abandoned. The colossal stones resisted storms and seasons. Black columns stacked like the bones of giants, heavy as eternity. The sea surged against its edges, but the city did not sink. Moss grew. Vines crept, salt etched its surfaces, but the basalt walls endured, unyielding, as if refusing to let go of the past. Nan Madol had been built from shadows, and shadows do not crumble. But no one dared to live there again. The people who once bowed to the dynasty refused to reclaim the city. Villages grew in the forests, homes were raised on the hills, but Nan Madol was left untouched. It was not simply fear, it was belief. The city was cursed, haunted by the ghosts of rulers consumed by the very spirits they once commanded. To step into its canals was to step into death's embrace. Locals told stories to their children, warnings wrapped in whispers. They said the sea still spoke within Nan Madol, that the waves carried voices not their own. They said if you lingered at night, you would hear footsteps on stone where no one walked, voices in chambers long abandoned, and lights flickering above the towers like torches held by invisible hands. The elders shook their heads when strangers asked why the city was left to the sea. It is not ours to claim, they said. Nan Madol belongs to the shadows. And so the city slept, untouched yet alive, a labyrinth of silence where the past had not died, but lingered, waiting. But silence is not emptiness. The few who dared to enter spoke of strange things. Fishermen who paddled too close swore the waters shifted beneath them. waves rising suddenly from calm seas as if something stirred below. Hunters who wandered near the ruins claimed they heard drums in the distance, though no fires burned and no people gathered. Some who stepped onto its basalt stones said the ground itself vibrated, as though remembering footsteps that had long vanished. Many never returned at all. Those who vanished became warnings themselves, proof that Nan Madol was not abandoned but guarded. The people said the spirits of the Sauteleur still walked the canals, trapped in the stones, bitter and vengeful. To disturb them was to invite their wrath, and so the city grew in legend. It became less a ruin and more a riddle. Was it a prison for the spirits of the rulers, or a shrine to powers beyond human reach? Was it a city that had once lived, or was it always meant to be dead? Travelers who heard the stories came to see it. Some laughed at the warnings, calling them superstition. They entered boldly, their footsteps echoing across silent chambers. But even they, the skeptics, returned uneasy. They spoke of a weight in the air, of shadows that seemed to move, of whispers that brushed against their ears like breath. One explorer claimed that as he stood by the canals at dusk, he saw ripples forming though the water was still, as if invisible hands trailed through it. Another swore he saw a figure watching him from the top of a basalt wall, a figure that vanished when he blinked. And there were those who left the island entirely, unwilling to remain so close to something so wrong. They carried with them stories of a place that resisted the touch of time and man, a city that rejected the living while holding onto the dead. For the people of Pohnpei, Nan Madol was not history. It was a wound. They did not visit it for memory or honor. They avoided it, allowing the sea to claim it slowly, as if the ocean itself was trying to bury what man could not. But Nan Madol did not sink. Storms tore at it, but the stones stood. Waves rose against it, but the walls remained. Moss claimed its surfaces, yet the basalt did not crumble. It was as if the city itself refused to die, as if it clung to the world with the same hunger with which it had consumed its rulers. And so, it became the silent city. Silent not because it held no sound, but because the sounds it carried were not of this world. The rush of waves through its canals carried whispers. The wind through its corridors carried sighs. The stones themselves seemed to hum, low and endless, vibrating with memory. Nan Madol was silent in the way a grave is silent, alive with what lies beneath. In time, more outsiders came. Explorers, scholars, wanderers. Some sought treasure, believing gold or relics must lie hidden within its walls. Others sought answers, convinced that its stones held secrets of ancient civilizations. But all who entered came away with the same impression. Nan Madol was not simply ruins. It was alive, watching, waiting. Some explorers recorded their findings. They wrote of the impossibility of the construction, of the massive basalt logs arranged with precision no ordinary tools could achieve. They marveled at its size, its complexity, its defiance of logic. But alongside their measurements and sketches, they also wrote of the unease they felt, the sense that they were not alone, the uncanny silence that seemed too deliberate, the shadows that lingered too long. One man described standing on a platform at midnight and hearing footsteps approaching behind him. He turned, but no one was there. Another claimed that as he crossed a canal, a sudden wave rose and nearly capsized his canoe, though the waters around him were calm as glass. Still another wrote that he awoke at night to see faint lights glowing along the walls, moving slowly as though carried by unseen hands. These were not coincidences, the islanders said. These were warnings. For Nan Madol was not abandoned. It was haunted not only by the spirits of the Sauteleur, but by the very curse that had destroyed them. The city itself had become the curse, a labyrinth of stone where time did not pass as it should, where silence was heavy with voices, where water carried secrets and shadows carried memory. The silent city did not forget. It remembered every cruelty, every offering, every scream. It remembered the rulers who had believed themselves gods, and the people who had suffered under their rule. It remembered the war that had broken its walls and the spirits that had claimed its kings. and it held those memories not as history, but as presence, alive, restless, dangerous. And so the people stayed away. They built their lives in other places, but Nan Madol stood always in their minds, a reminder of power misused and the shadows it awakens. Children were warned never to wander near it, for fear the city would take them. Fishermen avoided its waters, steering their boats wide, for fear the canals would rise and swallow them. At night, when the strange lights flickered above its walls, families closed their doors and whispered prayers. Nan Madol became more than stone. It became myth, a myth too real to ignore, too dangerous to touch. And yet, like all places of shadows, it drew the curious. Always there were those who wanted to see, to touch, to test the silence. And always the city answered them, with footsteps, with whispers, with waves that rose from calm waters. The silent city did not belong to the living. It belonged to itself. And those who entered its walls did so at their peril. For Nan Madol remembered what they had forgotten, that some cities are not made for men, but for shadows. For centuries, Nan Madol remained hidden in silence. It stood as a labyrinth of basalt stones, watched only by the sea and feared by the people who lived in its shadow. The islanders avoided it. The legends grew darker, and the ruins seemed content to sleep beneath the weight of their own sorrow. But silence cannot last forever. In the age of sails, when ships began to push deeper into the Pacific, carrying with them men who sought riches, lands, and discoveries, Nan Madol could no longer remain a secret. The ocean that had once protected it now carried strangers to its shores. And when these strangers arrived, they stumbled upon something they could not explain. It was the Europeans who first wrote of Nan Madol with wide eyes and shaking pens. They expected islands of palms and villages of huts, but instead they found a city of stone rising from the sea. A city larger than Venice, built not on earth but upon a coral reef in the middle of nowhere. Imagine what it must have been like for those sailors, their ships battered by months of endless waves, their eyes accustomed only to horizons of blue. And then, as they neared Pohnpei, they saw black walls rising from the water, walls not of wood or clay, but of stone, massive and deliberate, stretching across nearly 200 acres. At first, they did not believe it. How could such a place exist here, so far from the centers of civilization they knew? They marveled at the canals cutting through the city, at the towers of basalt columns stacked as if giants had placed them, at the sheer scale of the construction. Some thought they had stumbled upon a lost world. Others whispered of a forgotten empire. None could comprehend it. The sailors walked through its ruins, their boots clattering on stone that felt impossibly smooth and deliberate. They measured the walls, wide enough to defy imagination, and stared at the beams of basalt, some weighing more than 50 tons each. Their questions were endless. Where had the stones come from? How had they been moved across seas with no ships large enough to bear them? What tools could have shaped and lifted them? But answers were nowhere to be found. The city was silent, as it had always been. The islanders who lived nearby shook their heads when asked. They told the sailors the same stories they had always told, that Nan Madol was not built by men, but by powers beyond understanding. That spirits had carried the stones, that magic had summoned them from across the horizon, that the city was cursed, haunted, forbidden. The Europeans, men of science and conquest, laughed at the word magic. But when night fell and they camped among the ruins, their laughter turned uneasy. For the sailors too began to hear the whispers. They heard footsteps where no one walked. They heard voices murmuring through the canals, though the waters were still. They saw strange lights flicker above the basalt towers, lights with no source, shimmering like stars that had fallen to earth. Some wrote of sudden waves rising in the canals, rocking their boats though the sea around them remained calm. Others swore that shadows followed them, shadows that did not belong to their bodies. They left Nan Madol unsettled, their journals filled not only with measurements and sketches, but with fears they dared not name. Yet their words spread across the world. Europe spoke of Nan Madol as a riddle. Scholars debated whether it was the work of an ancient empire long forgotten, a rival to the wonders of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Adventurers dreamed of treasure hidden in its walls. And some, those with eyes fixed on the stars rather than the earth, whispered something even stranger. What if Nan Madol was not a city at all? What if it was something else entirely? Some began to wonder if the ruins were not human in origin. The precision of the stonework, the impossibility of its construction, the sheer scale of its ambition, all seemed too much for the hands of men without metal or machines. Theories spread like fire. Nan Madol, they suggested, might be the remnants of a lost continent, the drowned land of Mu or Lemuria, fragments of a civilization swallowed by the sea. Others went further still, claiming it was proof not of a forgotten human empire, but of something beyond this world. The stones themselves fed such speculation. Each beam of basalt weighed as much as a whale, yet they were stacked with precision, aligned as though measured by instruments no one could imagine. The Europeans knew their own technology struggled with such feats even in their age of progress. How then had islanders with no wheels, no cranes, no iron, lifted these stones into place? And why build it here, in the middle of the ocean, on a fragile reef where no foundation should stand? The more they studied, the less they understood. Nan Madol became not only a mystery, but an obsession. Scientists, missionaries, and explorers came in waves, each determined to explain what they saw. They carried rulers and compasses, journals and sketchbooks, but all left with more questions than answers. Some claimed the city must have been a capital, the seat of a vast empire that once stretched across the Pacific. They imagined fleets of ships, armies of workers, and rulers as powerful as pharaohs. But where was the empire's memory? Where were its records, its artifacts, its descendants? No other ruins of such scale existed in the Pacific. Nan Madol stood alone, a solitary riddle. Others argued it must be older than memory itself, older than the island, older perhaps than the sea that now surrounded it. Perhaps it was the last remnant of a world before the flood, a city that had survived the drowning of continents. Its stones, they said, were not placed by men, but by titans of an age long erased. But still, the silence of Nan Madol endured. The city refused to yield its secrets. The islanders watched as the Europeans puzzled, their eyes growing wider with each theory, their voices filled with wonder and unease. To the people of Pohnpei, it was simple. Nan Madol was cursed. It was haunted. It was not meant to be explained, only respected and avoided. But to the strangers, the curse only deepened the allure. And so, Nan Madol became more than ruins. It became legend in the eyes of the world. A lost city in the heart of the Pacific, larger than Venice, older than memory, impossible in its construction, silent in its answers. Yet for all the awe it inspired, Nan Madol remained a place of sorrow. The Europeans could not hear what the islanders heard in its silence. The grief of generations, the memory of tyranny, the weight of curses. To them, it was a puzzle to solve. To the people who lived in its shadow, it was a wound that would never heal. And still, the city resisted time. Its basalt towers stood unbroken. Its canals still flowed. Its stones still hummed with the memory of their impossible placement. The sailors left. The explorers came and went. The scholars argued. But Nan Madol did not change. It did not crumble. It did not answer. It only stood, watching, waiting. And in the end, all who saw it left with the same haunting thought. The stones themselves defy explanation. They are too massive to be carried without technology we still do not possess. Nan Madol is a riddle carved in stone, and at the center of its riddle lies the basalt itself. Towering black beams, stacked with impossible precision, forming walls and platforms that rise from the ocean as if grown there by some unnatural hand. For centuries, scholars, explorers, and locals alike have stood before these stones and asked the same question. How? How were they quarried? How were they shaped? How are they transported? And above all, why do they still stand? Each stone is a giant. Some weigh 25 tons. Others approach 50. They are not small blocks one could carry with ropes or roll-on logs. They are columns, massive and smooth, each one taller and wider than a man. Stacked like logs of a colossal firewood pile, they form walls that rise 20 feet high and stretch hundreds of feet long. Layer upon layer, row upon row, all resting atop a fragile coral reef in the middle of the Pacific. Scientists studied them, hoping to find answers in geology. They discovered that the basalt was volcanic in origin, formed from cooled lava. But there was a problem. No quarries exist nearby. The nearest deposits of such basalt lie miles away, across steep mountains and dense jungle, far beyond what ancient tools could traverse. So how are the stones brought here? Some suggested rafts, floated along rivers and then dragged across the sea. But the size and weight of the stones makes such a theory almost laughable. A single beam would have crushed any raft of palm trunks or canoes. Others proposed rollers, logs cut from trees to carry the weight. But where are the roads? Where are the scars on the land from such a colossal undertaking? The stones leave no trail behind them. They exist in Nan Madol and nowhere else. This is where the silence of science collides with the whispers of legend. The people of Pompeii do not explain the stones with rope or raft. Their legends say something else entirely. They say the stones flew. The ancient story tells of two brothers, Olysipa and Olysopa, who came across the sea with powers beyond human reach. They chanted, and the stones obeyed. They sang, and the basalt beams rose into the air, drifting like feathers though they weighed more than houses. Carried by spells, guided by voices, the stones crossed mountains and waters to settle upon the reef, where they were stacked into the labyrinth of Nan Madol. To the islanders, there is no mystery. There is only memory, and in that memory, the stones did not travel by hand. They were summoned. But could there be truth buried in this tale? When European explorers heard these legends, they dismissed them as fantasy, the myths of islanders trying to explain what they could not. But as the centuries passed and science failed to offer better answers, the old stories began to sound less like fantasy and more like fragments of something lost. Some wondered if the chants were not magic, but knowledge of forces forgotten, of ways to bend sound, magnetism, or gravity itself. Could it be that the stones were moved not by muscle, but by resonance, by a science so strange it seemed like sorcery? The idea is not without precedent. Across the world, legends of flying stones appear again and again. In Egypt, some say the pyramids were built by priests who sang the blocks into place. In the Andes, stories tell of stones that moved like living creatures, guided by whistles and flutes. In Tibet, monks speak of sound raising boulders into the air. Always the same refrain: sound, vibration, harmony. Stones that should not move, moving as if weightless. Nan Madol fits this chorus too perfectly to ignore. Imagine it, the night alive with chants, the air vibrating with power, the basalt beams trembling, then rising from the ground. Floating across forests, across waters, carried not by rope but by resonance. The city built not by the hands of men, but by the voices of men, echoing forces older than the earth itself. It is a vision both awe-inspiring and terrifying. For if such knowledge once existed, where did it go? Was it forgotten, or was it taken away? Was Nan Madol abandoned because its builders vanished, their knowledge lost with them? Or was it abandoned because the knowledge itself was too dangerous to keep? The stones of Nan Madol whisper their own answer. They still stand, unbroken, unyielding. They have survived centuries of storms, waves, and salt, refusing to fall. They do not seem like stones carried by human sweat. They seem like stones placed by destiny. Scientists return again and again to their mystery. Some attempt to calculate the manpower needed. Thousands of men dragging for decades, cutting trees, building rafts, hauling across impossible terrain. But such explanations collapse under their own weight. Pompeii never had the population for such a feat, and even if it had, why build on coral? Why Why risk collapse? Why raise a city not for living, but for ruling, for ritual, for shadows? The questions multiply. The answers do not. And so, the legend remains. The stones flew. But what if the legend is not mere fantasy? What if it is memory, fragmented, distorted by centuries, but true in essence? What if the chants and spells were not magic, but technology, a mastery of forces beyond our grasp? This is the true heart of the black basalt mystery. Not only the weight of the stones, but the weight of possibility. That Nan Madol is not only a city of the past, but a message from it. That somewhere in its basalt walls lies proof that humanity once held knowledge now forgotten. Knowledge so strange we mistake it for sorcery. And if that is true, then Nan Madol is not ruins at all. It is a reminder of what was lost. A reminder of what may one day be found again. A reminder that history is not always a straight path, but a cycle of remembering and forgetting. The stones of Nan Madol wait, silent yet humming, holding their secret in the weight of their presence. And in their silence lies the greatest question of all. What if these myths were not fantasy, but fragments of a forgotten science? Nan Madol rises from the Pacific like the bones of a fallen titan, a city of basalt resting on the skin of the sea. Its walls tower against waves, its canals cut like veins through stone, and for centuries it has defied storms, salt, and silence. Yet beneath it lies something even stranger, something that should not be. A coral reef, fragile and living, holding up millions of tons of basalt that by all logic should have dragged it into the depths long ago. It is here, in what lies below, that the riddle deepens. Coral is no foundation for an empire. It grows in slow, delicate branches, brittle when dry, fragile when crushed. And yet Nan Madol rests upon it, as though on steel, a city of impossible weight balanced on the bones of living reef. Scientists and scholars stare at this fact with disbelief. Who builds an empire on something destined to sink? Who lays stone upon coral, as though coral were as strong as mountains? Unless it wasn't meant for humans at all. The islanders knew the reef well. They fished from it. They navigated around it. They knew its strength and its fragility. And yet they never would have chosen it for a city. To build on coral was to court collapse, to summon disaster. Still, Nan Madol endures. Its stones stand where they should not, heavy on a foundation that should have shattered centuries ago. Some believe this is proof of the supernatural, that the stones were not placed with human purpose, but with a power beyond understanding, a power that cared nothing for the weakness of coral because it bent nature to its will. Others suggest the reef itself was not chosen, but commanded, hardened by forces we no longer know. But for all the theories, the truth remains hidden in the depths below. And so diverse came. Modern explorers, drawn by curiosity and the promise of answers, descended into the waters beneath Nan Madol. They expected to find coral and sand, perhaps cracks and crevices carved by waves. What they found was far more unsettling. Beneath the city, the reef was not natural. It was shaped. Divers reported structures beneath the water, arrangements of stone too deliberate to be chance, patterns too precise to be made by waves. Pillars and walls lay submerged, coated with coral but unmistakably crafted. They spoke of passageways and platforms extending below the visible city, as if Nan Madol above the water was only half the story, and the other half lay drowned beneath the sea. Some came back whispering that the city above was just the crown of a much greater ruin, a fragment of something vast and ancient swallowed by the ocean long before history remembered it. The basalt towers, impressive as they were, might have been only the final chapter of a city whose first chapters were already hidden in the dark. The thought is chilling. If Nan Madol is merely the visible tip of something larger, then what lies beneath? How deep does it go? How far does the labyrinth extend? And who built the part now drowned? Were they the same who raised the stones above? Or was the city beneath far older, a foundation inherited by rulers who barely understood what they had claimed? The divers who went deeper spoke of unease. Some said the waters grew colder as they descended, though no current explained it. Others said they heard sounds beneath the waves, low rumbles like drums beating from within the earth. A few swore they saw lights flickering in the dark, as though torches still burned in chambers where no man had walked for centuries. Not all returned. Those who vanished became part of Nan Madol's growing legend. The islanders nodded when they heard the stories. To them, it was no surprise. They had always said Nan Madol was cursed, that it reached beyond the human world, that to step too close was to invite disappearance. The sea beneath the city, they said, belonged not to men, but to spirits, and spirits do not welcome intruders. Still, the exploration continued. Photographs were taken, sketches drawn, reports filed. But no report could capture the unease of what was seen below. Structures that should not exist, angles too precise to be natural, walls swallowed in coral, but still whispering of hands that had placed them long ago. The reef was no accident. It was a grave. Some theorized that Nan Madol was built atop an earlier city, a civilization swallowed by the rising seas, its ruins used as foundation for the basalt towers. Others suggested something more haunting, that Nan Madol was never meant for the surface at all. There was always a city of both land and sea, a threshold between two worlds. The ocean keeps its secrets well. Beneath its surface lies memory too vast, too deep for men to measure. But in Nan Madol, those secrets press close to the skin of the earth, close enough to touch, close enough to unsettle. The basalt above whispers of mystery, but the reef beneath hums with something deeper, the memory of a city that should not stand, resting on bones that should not hold it. And in this mystery lies the question that has haunted all who gaze upon Nan Madol. Was it truly built for men? If it was, then it was madness, a city doomed to sink, destined to crumble, a defiance of nature too foolish to last. Yet it has lasted, standing for centuries where it should not. And if it was not built for men, then who? Or what was it built for? The reef does not answer. It only waits. Its coral branches clutch the stones, holding them in silence, hiding what lies beneath. But the divers know, and the islanders whisper, and the city itself hums. Nan Madol above is not the whole. It is only the crown of something far older, far deeper, far darker. And so the mystery of Nan Madol does not end with its towers. It plunges beneath the water, into depths where life falters and silence grows heavy, into ruins unseen yet undeniable. For beneath Nan Madol lies a reef that should not hold its weight, yet does. And beneath that reef lie structures that should not exist, yet remain. Structures that whisper of a greater city, a city drowned yet alive, a city whose story has not yet been told. Nan Madol stands silent in the Pacific, its basalt towers rising where no city should exist, its canals whispering with voices that refuse to die. For centuries, it has defied explanation. Was it built by rulers with unimaginable power, by spirits conjured from shadows, or by knowledge lost to time? No answer has satisfied, and so the mystery has grown until it reached beyond the Pacific itself. Some scholars began to look not only at Nan Madol, but at the world. They searched for echoes, other stories, other ruins, other legends that whispered of places swallowed by the sea. And in those echoes, they found something unsettling. Nan Madol did not stand alone. It stood as part of a chorus of loss. They linked it to Lemuria, the fabled continent said to have stretched across the Indian Ocean before vanishing beneath the waves. They linked it to Mu, the mythical land of the Pacific, described as a cradle of civilization swallowed by cataclysm. And of course, they linked it to Atlantis, the greatest legend of them all, a city of impossible grandeur, struck down by pride, drowned by the sea, remembered only in fragments and warnings. Could Nan Madol be a surviving fragment of one of these lost worlds? The thought is both thrilling and terrifying. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, names spoken with both awe and doubt. myths dismissed by many yet haunting in their persistence. Across continents, across cultures, the same theme arises. Civilizations too vast to imagine, swallowed suddenly by water, leaving behind only ruins, whispers, and fear. The echoes are everywhere. Stone circles half buried beneath coasts, submerged walls seen only by divers. Myths of floods carried in the memory of every people. Nan Madol fits the pattern too perfectly. A city built on the sea, with stones too massive for its people, with foundations that stretch beneath the water into ruins unseen. It feels less like an isolated wonder and more like a remnant of something greater, a shard of a world that the ocean claimed long ago. But if that is true, then its curse is not only local. It is not merely the sorrow of Pohnpei, or the tyranny of the Sauteleur, or the whispers of spirits in basalt walls. Its curse is part of a cycle far older and far wider. Civilizations rising in brilliance, then vanishing into the deep as though the sea itself demands balance. The people of Pohnpei always felt this weight. Their legends speak of Nan Madol as a place conjured, not built. A place summoned from shadows, not carved from stone. But if the city is a fragment of something older, then perhaps the people were right. Perhaps it was not theirs to begin with. Perhaps it was a ghost of a continent long gone, still clinging to the surface of the world. And here lies the psychological twist. If Nan Madol is an echo of lost worlds, then what happened to those worlds is not myth, but memory. And if it happened before, it can happen again. Civilizations believe themselves immortal. They raise towers, carve monuments, write their names in stone. They believe they will last forever. Yet the ocean does not care. The ocean rises, the earth trembles, and what once seemed eternal is swallowed in an instant. Nan Madol is proof of that truth. A city of stone greater than Venice, built where it should not stand, abandoned by those who feared it, and left to the whispers of the sea. The ocean remembers what men forget. And in Nan Madol, the ocean has left a warning. Divers who explore beneath its reef return with stories not only of stone, but of scale. They describe walls stretching beyond sight, platforms vast enough to dwarf the ruins above, as though the visible city is nothing but the crown of something deeper. If that is true, then Nan Madol above water is not the city at all. It is only the echo of what lies beneath. And if what lies beneath stretches wide enough, vast enough, then perhaps it is not only Nan Madol's story. Perhaps it is the story of Mu, of Lemuria, of Atlantis itself. Fragments of one world, broken and scattered across oceans, drowned but not erased. The thought unsettles the mind. For if such a world once existed, then it carried knowledge greater than our own. Knowledge that could raise stones without machines. Knowledge that could build empires on coral. Knowledge that could summon cities from shadows. And if that knowledge was lost, if it was buried with the continents that held it, then what we call myths may only be memories too great for us to believe. Yet the stones of Nan Madol stand as proof. They are not fantasy. They are not legend. They are real, black and heavy, stacked in silence upon a reef where no city should endure. They whisper of powers we cannot explain, of histories we cannot trace. They whisper that the myths are not lies, but warnings. Civilizations rise. Civilizations fall. And in their fall, they leave echoes. Nan Madol is one of those echoes. And so the curse of Nan Madol becomes larger than the island itself. It becomes the curse of all who build too high, who believe themselves unshakable, who forget that the sea is patient. If it is part of the cycle, then it is not finished. It is waiting. Atlantis was said to fall because of pride. Lemuria was said to vanish in fire. Mu was said to drown without trace. And Nan Madol still stands half above the sea, half below, as though caught between memory and erasure. It is not gone, yet it is not alive. It is an echo caught in stone, a reminder of what has been and what may be again. The question that lingers is the most haunting of all. Who first called the stones to rise from the ocean? Were they men, using knowledge now forgotten? Were they gods, shaping the world as they pleased? Or were they something else entirely? Beings from beyond the earth, leaving monuments to remind us of what came before. The stones do not answer. They only stand, massive and silent, their weight pressing down on every man who dares to walk among them. But in their silence lies a truth too vast to ignore. Nan Madol is not just a city. It is an echo of a world that has already vanished, and a warning of worlds that may vanish again. Today, Nan Madol still stands. Its basalt towers rise black and silent against the restless Pacific, their edges softened by moss and time, their weight pressing into the fragile reef below. Waves wash gently against the canals, carrying whispers that seem older than the sea itself. Birds wheel above, their cries echoing through chambers where once rulers demanded silence. The city endures, not alive, not dead, caught in that strange place where ruins linger, refusing to vanish, refusing to yield. It is a place of contradictions. Moss softens its walls, yet the stones remain sharp, heavy, unbroken. Salt eats at its edges, yet the structures resist collapse. Storms batter its sides, yet the city stands defiant as ever. Nan Madol feels less like ruins fading into the past, and more like ruins waiting for the future. A city both dead and immortal. To walk its stones today is to step into another world. The air feels heavier, as though time itself hangs thicker here. Every footstep echoes, too loud in the silence, bouncing between basalt towers like whispers answering back. The canals ripple, carrying reflections of walls that seem taller than they are, as though the city stretches deeper in shadow than in stone. Nothing moves, yet everything feels alive. Visitors speak of an unease they cannot explain. Some describe the sensation of being watched, though no eyes are there. Others say the silence grows so heavy it begins to press on the chest, as though the city itself is weighing them down. A few claim the stones hum, low and steady, a vibration that enters the body like a second heartbeat. Nan Madol feels awake. It is a place of sadness. For the people of Pohnpei, it is not a monument of pride, but a wound. They see in it the memory of the Sauteleur, the dynasty of cruelty that demanded obedience until even the gods turned against them. They remember the curse that followed, the famine, the storms, the whispers that filled the canals. Nan Madol is a reminder of pain, of chains broken too late, of rulers consumed by shadows. But it is also a place of beauty. The basalt walls gleam black in the rain, their surfaces shining like polished mirrors. The moss creeps in emerald veins, softening the edges of towers that rise like the ribs of giants. The canals shimmer in the sun, their waters carrying the sky between stone walls older than memory. And at night, when the moon drifts above, the city glows with a pale silver, its silence deepening into something almost sacred. It is this duality that gives Nan Madol its power. It is sorrow and wonder, curse and beauty, ruin and monument. It is history and myth coiled together in stone. Yet the most haunting part of Nan Madol is not what can be seen, but what is felt. Legends say those who sleep within its walls do not rest as they should. They dream, and in their dreams, voices whisper. Some hear chants, low and rhythmic, like the voices of the brothers who first called the stones. Others hear cries, the echoes of prisoners lost in the dynasty's prisons. Still others hear the sea itself speaking in a tongue they cannot understand. But all who dream wake with the same unease, the feeling that the city is calling for return. For centuries, no one has answered. The people of Pohnpei avoid Nan Madol, refusing to live within its walls, refusing to claim it as their own. To them, it is cursed, a place of restless spirits and unfinished business. Yet outsiders come still, drawn by curiosity, by mystery, by the pull of ruins that should not exist. They measure, they map, they write, but they do not understand, because Nan Madol is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a presence to be felt. The city refuses to die. It endures not only in stone, but in memory, in legend, in the uneasy silence that clings to it. Every ruin has a story, but Nan Madol feels as though it is the story, written not on paper, but in basalt, told not with words, but with silence, waiting not to be read, but to be remembered. And so the question remains, why? Why does it endure when so many other ruins crumble? Why does it resist time, storms, and salt? Why does it hum with memory when other cities fade into dust? Perhaps the answer lies in its birth. Nan Madol was not built like other cities. It was conjured, summoned, called into being by voices and shadows. It was born from powers beyond human reach, raised from the sea as though the ocean itself obeyed. Such a birth cannot die easily. It lingers as shadows linger, as curses linger, as songs linger even after their singers are gone. Or perhaps the answer lies in its purpose. Nan Madol was never a city for living. It was not built for homes, for markets, for laughter. It was a city of rulers, of rituals, of power. A stage for gods and kings, a labyrinth for sacrifice and control. It was never meant to thrive. It was meant to endure. And endure it has, but endurance carries a cost. Nan Madol is alive in silence, yet empty of life. It stands unbroken, yet unwanted. It waits, yet no one comes. It is a monument to a history no one wishes to claim, a throne that no one dares to sit upon. It is a city that cannot die and yet cannot live. And perhaps that is the greatest curse of all. Still, the whispers remain. The lights still flicker above its towers on certain nights. The waves still rise suddenly in its canals as if stirred by unseen hands. The stones still hum with memory, vibrating softly as though waiting for a voice to call them again. Legends say those who dare to stay overnight in Nan Madol hear the voices not only in dreams, but in waking silence. They feel presences around them, brushing close like shadows that never touch. They see figures in the moonlight, pale against the basalt, vanishing when looked at directly. They wake with the sense that they were not alone, that something still walks the city when human eyes are closed. Nan Madol waits. It has always waited. For centuries, it has endured storms, silence, and sorrow. It has seen rulers rise and fall, seen scholars come and go, seen myths grow and spread. And still it stands, neither alive nor dead, a city caught between memory and presence. And so the final question lingers, heavier than the stones themselves. If the stones still hum with memory, if the voices still whisper in dreams, if the shadows still move in silence, then perhaps Nan Madol was never abandoned at all. Beneath the waves and within the stones, Nan Madol still whispers. It stands as a city of shadows, of sorrow, of unanswered questions, a place too strange to explain, too enduring to forget. Perhaps its story has ended, or perhaps it has only paused, waiting for the moment when its secrets will rise again. But one truth remains certain. The world is filled with places like this. Cities lost to time, lands swallowed by the sea, ruins where silence speaks louder than words. Nan Madol is only one of them, a single echo in a chorus of forgotten worlds. And if the stones of this city can still hum with memory, what other voices might still call from the dark? If you felt the weight of this tale, if you want to journey deeper into the mysteries of lost civilizations, cursed places, and forgotten empires, then let this not be the end. Let it be a beginning. Join us, return to the fire, and step again into the shadows of history. Like this story, share it with those who crave the unknown. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you do not miss the next tale waiting to be uncovered. Because some cities may fall, but their stories never die. And together, we will seek them,